The science of optimism versus pessimism, what brain scans reveal. Optimists' brains share similar patterns, while pessimists are unique, study reveals. July 21, 2025. For Minute Read. A new brain scan study suggests that optimists share similar patterns of brain activation when thinking about the future, while pessimists each have unique patterns. This finding could help neuroscientists understand the neural basis of optimism and pessimism. The study, published in the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences USA, builds on Leo Tolstoy's famous line from Anna Karenina, "All happy families are alike, each unhappy family is unhappy in its own way." The researchers found that optimists' brain patterns were similar when imagining future events, but pessimists' patterns were distinct. We tend to think of imagining the future as a deeply personal, subjective act, says lead author Kuniaki Yanagisawa, a psychologist at Kobe University in Japan. Our study, however, shows that, especially for optimists, the way our brains do this can be similar. This shared cognitive framework could explain why we connect with some people more easily than others, he adds. Previous studies have shown that optimists have larger social networks and higher peer acceptance. Yanagisawa wanted to investigate whether this social success was due to personality or a shared brain mechanism that facilitates social connections. The researchers scanned participants' brains using functional magnetic resonance imaging, fMRI, while they imagined specific future events happening to themselves or their spouse. Some events were positive, while others were neutral or negative. Afterward, participants completed a questionnaire to determine their level of optimism or pessimism. The study was conducted twice, once with 37 participants and again with 50. The researchers focused on the medial prefrontal cortex, a brain region particularly active during future imagination. They compared patterns of brain activation in pairs of participants and used statistical tests to determine the similarity of activations within each pair. Only pairs of optimistic participants had similar brain activation, pairs with one or two pessimistic participants were dissimilar. Optimists also showed greater differences in brain patterns for emotionally positive and negative events compared to pessimists. Similar results have been found in studies of other, positive, social traits. A 2022 brain scan study revealed that people with central positions in their social networks had similar activation patterns, while less central individuals had more idiosyncrasies. The same pattern emerged in a study of people with low versus high levels of loneliness. Social neuroscientist Eliza Beck, lead author of those studies, refers to these findings as examples of the Anna Karenina principle. Successful endeavors share similar characteristics, while unsuccessful ones differ in their own ways. One intriguing interpretation of the optimism study, consistent with the Anna Karenina principle, is that there may be many different ways for a person to be pessimistic, while optimistic people tend to converge on a few shared mental models of a hopeful future, Beck says. These studies suggest that being on the same page as others is a fundamental mechanism underlying social connection. However, the traits considered positive vary across societies, raising the risk of cultural bias. Yanagisawa believes that cultural values could drive the effect, orienting people toward specific goals valued in their society, such as optimism or social connections, leading to similar behaviors and thoughts over time. It's also possible that optimism, as measured in this study, overlaps with related traits like loneliness or social network position. These convergent findings raise an important question about the overlap between constructs such as optimism, loneliness, and network centrality, Beck says. As the new study didn't control for loneliness or social network position, and Beck's prior work didn't control for optimism, it's unclear how much these dimensions overlap or are distinct. Optimism and pessimism are not fixed traits, they shift with age, with varying trajectories across cultures. Moreover, optimism is not always beneficial. Extreme optimism might not always be a good thing because we might not plan for the future as well as we should, says Aliyah Devitt, a psychologist at the University of Waikato in New Zealand who studies future thinking. Pessimism can be useful in some situations, as evidenced by the concept of defensive pessimism, which can help people better prepare for the future. Optimists think alike, pessimists see the future their own way. Neuroscience and social psychology. Did you know that optimists' brains work similarly when thinking about future events, while pessimists' brains show a much larger degree of individuality? This fascinating finding from Kobe University offers an explanation for why optimists are seen as more sociable. They may share a common vision of the future. But here's where it gets controversial: optimists really more sociable, or is this just a stereotype? And what does this mean for those who lean more towards pessimism? Let's dive deeper into this intriguing research. Optimists tend to be more satisfied with their social relationships and have wider social networks. Kobe University psychologist Yanogisawa Kuniaki wondered, but what is the reason for this? Recent studies showed that the brains of people who occupy central social positions react to stimuli in similar ways. So it may be that people who share a similar attitude toward the future, too, truly envision it similarly in their brains, and that this makes it easier for them to understand each other's perspectives. To test this hypothesis, Yanogisawa assembled an interdisciplinary team from both the fields of social psychology and cognitive neuroscience. The team recruited 87 test subjects who covered the whole spectrum from pessimism to optimism and asked them to imagine various future events. While doing so, their brain activity was recorded with a technique called functional magnetic resonance imaging, fMRI, enabling the researchers to see how the test subjects' thinking about the future materializes in their brains as patterns of neural activity. In the journal PNAS, the Kobe University team reports that when optimists think about future events, their neural activity patterns are in fact mutually similar. Pessimists' patterns, on the other hand, showed much more diversity. Inspired by the opening line of Leo Tolstoy's Anna Karenina, the team summarizes its results, saying, "Optimistic individuals are all alike, but each less optimistic individual imagines the future in their own way." Yanogisawa says, what was most dramatic about this study is that the abstract notion of thinking alike was literally made visible in the form of patterns of brain activity. Yanogisawa and his team also found that there is a more pronounced difference in neural patterns when thinking about positive events or negative events in optimists than in pessimists. This means that more optimistic people perceive a clear distinction between good and bad futures in their brains. In other words, optimism does not involve positive reinterpretation of negative events. Instead, optimistic individuals typically process negative scenarios in a more abstract and psychologically distant manner, thus mitigating the emotional impact of such scenarios, he explains. The psychologist sums up the study, saying, "The everyday feeling of being on the same wavelength is not just a metaphor. The brains of optimists may in a very physical sense share a common concept of the future. But this raises new questions. Is this shared mechanism something they are born with, or is it woven in later, for example, through experience and dialogue?" Yanogisawa's ultimate goal is to gain a deeper understanding of what causes loneliness and what enables people to communicate with each other. He says, "I believe that elucidating the process by which this shared reality emerges is a step toward a society where people can communicate better." What do you think about this research? Do you agree that optimists are more sociable, or is this just a stereotype? And what does this mean for those who lean more towards pessimism? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. Unlocking the optimistic brain: how positivity shapes our future thinking. Is your brain wired for hope or for gloom? New neuroscience research sparks a fascinating debate about how optimists and pessimists actually see the world, and how these differences are literally visible inside the brain. But here's where it gets controversial: do optimists see reality more clearly, or just filter it differently? Let's dive into the science and the debate. Scanning the minds of dozens of volunteers, scientists have discovered that people with a rosy outlook on life share strikingly similar patterns of brain activity when they imagine what's ahead. Whether they are picturing acing an exam, planning a dream vacation, or worrying about losing their job, optimists' brains seem to process these future scenarios in a remarkably unified way. This isn't just about thinking happy thoughts, it's about how their brains are structurally organized to approach uncertainty with a shared set of mental tools. The lead researcher, Kuniaki Yanogisawa from Kobe University, Japan, explains, optimists aren't just positive people, they seem to have a common neural framework for thinking about what's coming next. This isn't about everyone envisioning identical futures, but about using the same mental playbook to process possibilities. And this is the part most people miss: this shared brain wiring could be the secret behind their social success, not just because they are cheerful, but because they connect with others on a deeper, almost instinctive level. Here's how the study worked. 87 adults answered questions to measure their optimism, then underwent brain scans while imagining a mix of future events, some thrilling, like a globe-trotting adventure, some neutral, and some downright worrisome, like job loss. A few even contemplated scenarios involving death. The results? When optimists thought about the future, their medial prefrontal cortex, the brain's hub for future-oriented thinking, lit up in similar ways, almost as if working from the same script. So, what about the pessimists? Their brain activity was notably more varied, especially when considering negative outcomes. Yanagisawa speculates that this could reflect a wider range of concerns or anxieties, or, more controversially, that pessimists might feel disconnected from the shared goals and values that shape most people's futures, causing them to approach uncertainty in their own, unique ways. This echoes the famous opening line of Anna Karenina, "All happy families are alike, each unhappy family is unhappy in its own way." The researchers even quote this, suggesting, optimistic people are alike, but every less optimistic person envisions the future in a different way. But it's not just about optimism being a happy monolith. The study also found that optimists' brains didn't just look alike, they processed positive and negative events with clearer distinctions. In other words, they are not just ignoring the bad stuff, they are better at sorting the good from the bad, which might help them bounce back faster from setbacks. Yanagisawa notes that this sharper mental sorting has been linked before to a more abstract, psychologically distanced style of thinking, almost as if optimists can step back from negative outcomes, viewing them with less emotional intensity. Yanagisawa is quick to clarify, we're not saying optimists all predict rainbows and butterflies. Their actual thoughts and imagined futures can be quite different. But the structure of their thinking, how they separate hope from fear, shows a remarkable consistency. Bringing in an outside perspective, Lisa Bortolotti, a professor at the University of Birmingham, highlights a subtle but crucial point: optimists may imagine negative events with less vividness and detail compared to positive ones. This doesn't mean they are out of touch with reality, they just process potential threats in a way that makes them less distressing. And here's where the conversation heats up. Bortolotti argues that optimism isn't about denying reality or ignoring risks, but about how those risks affect us emotionally. She points out that blind optimism, assuming nothing will go wrong, can backfire if it leaves us unprepared. But when optimism is paired with motivation, it can help us strive for our goals. The more vividly we picture success, the more we're driven to achieve it. So, what do you think? Is optimism a powerful tool for resilience and social connection, or does it sometimes blind us to real dangers? Do you believe optimists are really ahead of the game, or should we all be a little more cautious when looking to the future? Let's hear your thoughts. You Team Hope or Team Caution? Drop your comments below, and let's dig into the optimism controversy together.